Welcome back to the Barton and Bud Show. We've got some good news to talk about. We've got more recruiting to talk about as always. I think we're going to get into the mailbag because thanks to you guys, we got a lot of good topics that y'all want to discuss. We appreciate all the reviews. Keep them coming. 5 stars. Give us a comment. That helps us out a lot as we continue to try to get traction on this show. But Bud, how are we doing your way down in Florida? I know we got more commits. I know you've got an updated number for us on that front. What's going on your way, man?
Man, we're doing pretty well. It's a little rainy and a little hot, but I'd take the heat over the rain any day. So
No doubt.
I'm hoping this lets up a little bit. So commits wise, yeah, that's ratings. I almost read off the ratings number there. Commits 861 players have committed right now. Last year at this time, 376. So 861 versus 376. We are well ahead of double the pace. Now, of course, schools are going to run out of spots eventually, but I continue to believe if things open up, if we get visits opened up and players back on campus for that kind of stuff in time for kids to be able to take multiple visits, I think we're going to have like some serious flips going on. Because there's some mismatched prospects to their schools right now.
It's going to be wild. And so it'll be interesting to find out what that even means, when opening up would even take place. Obviously now, June is a time when campuses are starting to open up, college campuses, in terms of getting guys there for workouts. Does that mean that the dead period will end in June and some kids will be able to get on campus? Does that even mean the kids will have the opportunity to take visits as much as they otherwise would have? Because I assume that locally their high school programs will be more intent on getting back to work and getting their hands on them as well. But, so many of these local programs and local coaches understand the importance of recruiting and getting these guys home on the next level. So, yeah, I think whenever the green light goes up, I think that there's going to be all of a sudden this new influx of information that these guys are processing from the recruiting standpoint. And it's going to be flip season come early all over college football. And it's going to be kind of a wild ride to December and February as you throw the money signs, because, a lot of people are going to want to find out about that.
No doubt. That's going to be some awesome VIP content there. Yeah, we also don't know, some schools may be open for visits and some schools might not. We really haven't gotten any direction from the NCAA on how it plans to handle this going forward. And we might have some high schools in some states play football in the fall and some not. I had this question on Twitter, and this is sort of off the cuff here, but it made me think of it. What happens if some high school state or some states decide we're not playing high school football this year, and a lot of states decide that we are? In fact, I think we have a mailbag question maybe later in the show that touches on that a little bit. That's going to be really interesting. I think there's far less interconnectivity between state to state high school wise than there is college football wise, because obviously states are not relying on massive TV contracts and conference agreements to make money. So they're really kind of each on their own, doing their own thing. That's going to be fascinating. But you mentioned players getting back on campus. We got some pretty good news about that this week.
We did. In fact, I just pulled up Brandon Marcello's story on 24/7 Sports. You can find it. College football return dates is the headline of the story. You can just Google it. But sort of around the country, they're starting to set dates of getting guys back on campus. The SEC, basically across the board, is June 8th. There's a couple of programs, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, that have not announced a date, but the SEC has sort of opened up the gates to allow people to get on campus. It looks like Notre Dame seems to be working towards a June date. June 15th for Baylor. The rest of the Big 12, largely undecided, but Texas Tech, June 15th. Ohio State, June 8th. Iowa, June 8th. Illinois, Indiana, mid-June. So bottom line is sort of a June 1st to June 8th. I think even just right as we came on this, Clemson announced June 8th to get back with their kids as well. The gate's open. It's heading towards the preparation, the lead time for a college football season. And to me, this is huge news for the idea of a normalized college football season. I go back, so I think back to like, I guess this was probably mid to early April, the very beginning stages of the quarantine and the lockdowns. And this was at a point when a lot of college coaches were still saying, well, we hope to get on the field in the spring, or we hope to get spring practice back together with our players, or we hope to get on the road. Like this, there was still a little bit of denial that things were just going to be locked down nationwide. And I remember talking to one coach, a college coach, who said, look, people are saying May, people are saying, into March. He's like, look, realistically, I don't expect it to be able to have access in person with our kids until June. And I thought that was a very sobering but measured way of looking at it and thinking about it. And I thought that was also realistic. Like, to me, I was like, you know what, you're probably right. That's probably about what we're looking at. And so I think it's so interesting that between that period of time and now, there was a lot of like, is the season even going to happen? A lot of doom and gloom, a lot of like just uncertainty, but for good reason. And I think it's really encouraging to me that when we think back to April, a measured, smart view of it was probably June we get them back, with the perspective of, and we'll play in the fall. To now, all the hubbub, all the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys, and just sort of fear and concern and precautions that we've taken between now and then, and the emotional roller coaster of whether it'll be a season. Here we are, and June's approaching, and sort of that measured take from April is going to hit, or looks like it's going to hit. To me, like, that's a really encouraging sign for the reality of a relatively normal college football season for most of the country.
And you and I are two people who want college football to happen, right? It seems like some media members are kind of cheering for it not to happen, which is kind of annoying to me. But like, the educated take back then was June would be awesome if we get it. Like, there was so much we didn't know. Even the best modeling out there was the variance on it was so big because of your inputs are suspect, right? And that's going to be the case with any sort of broad spectrum public modeling you could do. We did know what it had done in other countries as far as how long it took to get it under control. So, April, May, not really all that realistic. People are like, oh, we'll be back. And your coach was dead on there, just looking at what had happened in China and Italy. I think getting them back now in June, probably the first or second episode we ever did on our maiden voyage for this show. We said, look, you don't have to have a vaccine in order to play football in the fall. You do have to be at least on the backside of the curve. The line cannot just be continually rocketing up, right, and bring people back to football. It looks like in many places we're kind of there right now, where it's starting to slide down some, and that's great news. And I'm excited about having football in the fall.
I feel like this is sort of when you and I both like to put a few friendly wagers on football games. I feel like this is like when you feel great about a pick. You got whatever state -7 or whatever, and then opening kickoff, the other team runs it back for a touchdown. First possession, there's a turnover, and you're like, that was the dumbest pick of my life. This is going to be horrible. Like, what did I do? And then the game levels out, and the reason you picked it shines through, and ultimately, at the end of the day, your team ends up winning by 20. And you're back to like, all right, I get it. Like, that's, I feel like we've gone through that. We've gone through the pick sixes. We've gone through the kick return for a touchdown. We've gone through the mistakes along the way, and things, I hope, I mean, look, I don't know, but I hope things are leveling out a little bit. Get guys back on campus in June, continue to have very limited issues in terms of the spread. And then we have some form of real football on Saturdays in the fall, and that's the goal. And I'm starting to feel confident it happens, even though I think there's a real, there's some scenarios out there that, hey, maybe like, I don't know what the Pac-12 looks like this year. Like, I don't know if every team in the country is going to play 12 games. I don't know, there's probably some level of like it's not going to be a uniform season that we're maybe used to, but I feel like we're going to have something to consume and something to enjoy, and kids will be able to play the game they love.
I'm excited about it. So I'm also really excited to get to our listener mailbag here. Like you said earlier, 308 ratings and reviews for a podcast that's only like, what, 6-7 weeks old now, I guess. Really
God,
enjoy
we're
doing
that
this
old?
thing with yeah, man. I think we're 2
Man,
months old. This is solid.
old heads.
So we got 1, 2, 3. We got like 20 questions in here. We're not going to get through all of these today. If you ask us a question in the Apple Podcast review section, we really appreciate it. I've taken and pulled all of them that we haven't done yet. Hopefully we haven't answered any of these already. I don't think we have, but we'll just go for about, an hour. And then when we're done with it, we'll save them for next week. It's obviously still the off season. There's still a chance we have a little prolonged off season. Hopefully not, but we need all the content we can get. And we also have some cool stuff. Barton and I were kicking some ideas around on Slack this morning. He's like, you want to fire this bullet now, or you want to kind of do a little more research on it and do it next week or the week after? And I think we're gonna have some really cool shows for you in the coming weeks as well, and maybe a week where we do 2 shows. But I'm gonna kind of throw this one to you first. This is from G. Rolft, and first of all, he said a whole lot of nice things about us. He called us geniuses in the comment, and I was like, oh, here it goes. This is going to be a total smack talk one. But he was genuine in that. And I don't know if that's deserved, but he says, the only question I have, is there any analysis done comparing your rankings back to Pro Football Focus, specifically to compare how 24/7 is doing prior to the draft? That's an interesting question there.
Yeah, I think, it's ultimately Pro Football Focus is still a subjective grade on players. And so, sure, I think it's a viable approach. The thing I like about Pro Football Focus is even if there might be a few issues I have with sort of the way they rate players, ultimately they're doing it off of the legwork. Like they're watching every game, they're watching every play, they're grading every play. And so to me, that's like an incredibly valuable resource that is not the case with the other ways of evaluating or ranking, which is, your all conference teams, all American teams, production, whatever. Like those are all flawed. So I think I like the way PFF does it. I think my only thing is when you are evaluating a player's ranking, a player's development is a moving target throughout his college career and even after. Like at what point do you pinpoint and say, got it right or got it wrong or not doing well, too late, not worried about it anymore. Like at some point you just have to sort of stop the moving target and say, this is the moment in time we are saying we're going to measure it. And so, yeah, I think PFF, sure, like that's a fair way of like seeing how we're doing somewhere along the way during their career. But ultimately, the final grade on their college career is the NFL draft to us. Like that's the bow. Like that's you present your resume of your college and let's see where you get taken. So otherwise a guy's PFF grade may fluctuate freshman to sophomore to junior year. Who was the cornerback from Florida State that just went undrafted this year?
McFadden.
No.
Stanford Samuels.
No, this cycle.
The short 5-star out of Virginia.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Levante Taylor.
Yes, he was like one of the top graded PFF guys in the country as a sophomore maybe, and then he goes undrafted a couple years later. So like it just depends on where you want to pinpoint how you're evaluating someone. And my favorite way to articulate the NFL draft is the best way to do that right now to me is the idea that if you are to look at an NFL draft in the future, in the past, whenever you want to do it, and take a snapshot of that draft and ask yourself this question: what does that order of players correlate best with? Their previous college success or their future NFL success? Without question, it correlates best with their previous college success. And like NFL success could go all over the place. Hall of Famers get drafted in the 6th round, whatever. But there's no college football. Like the college football Hall of Famer that goes undrafted is an incredible outlier that we rarely ever see. So that's sort of that's kind of the way I view it and why I view it that way.
It's interesting too. I'm not saying that I don't buy into PFF's ratings. I think there's some value in them, but I really buy into their pro ratings a lot better. Just from things I've heard, I think that's a superior product. It's one they've been working on for a much longer time. I think the schemes that people run in the pros are much more similar team to team than what you see in college for the most part. And a lot of that's because players transfer around, due to free agency and whatnot. And you have to have systems that are at least somewhat similar. So guys on the taxi squad and through free agency can get on there. I don't know if PFF college is at a point to where we want to trust that as like the object metric. I don't think it's anywhere close to what the draft is at this point. I don't buy into their college ratings quite like I do their pro stuff.
Yeah. I think ultimately the GMs are still our best way of determining who a player is.
The other thing is, do we know, like, can you, if you're graded an 80 grade by PFF or whatever in the Sun Belt, is there any sort of competition level adjustment made for that? Or like, are you an 80 grade as well if you're in the SEC? Like you see what I'm saying here? If you do 80% of your assignments right, is that your grade for like regardless? So like, is there any kind of competition level adjustment being made?
I'm not sure on that. Though it seems like there would be, because otherwise the all conference player in, I don't know. I'm not gonna to speculate. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
But yeah. So I think the PFF is, I like what they do. I think it's valuable, but ultimately, I think NFL GMs give us more value. Next question. And I just got signed out of our doc. So, Bud, you go ahead and read it.
Okay. So the next question is from Brennan King, and he asks, and this is one of Barton's favorite questions, what has to happen for Clemson to truly be the team of the decade? 5 championships in 10 years, Heisman's, draft picks, simply beating Alabama on the precious metrics for their run this past decade? So I think this is interesting because Barton actually misread this question initially, and he read it, what has happened to make Clemson the team of the decade? I'll let him answer that one first, and then I'll actually answer the question how it was asked. Unless you want to swap the order.
No. I'm happy to go. This is going to take me some time though. So I got into a rabbit hole here because I think Clemson and their rise is a fascinating case study, because we're very much on the, carrying the banner of recruiting matters, talent trumps all. You take your chances with the talented roster. Like that's your best bet. And Clemson has recruited at a high level, but Clemson hasn't built their championships in the same way Nick Saban at Alabama did his. I mean, Nick Saban is a phenomenal coach, and Urban Meyer in the same way. Like those guys are great coaches. There shouldn't take anything. You can be both a good recruiter and a good coach, but I think those guys have consistently fielded teams that are usually more talented than who they're playing. I don't think Clemson's rise has necessarily always been like that. Hasn't always been the characteristic of the Clemson rise. So I went back to the beginning of the Dabo Swinney era, or at least the beginning of the rise here. And so 2009. All right. So that's Clemson went 9-4 with Kyle Parker as their quarterback, Billy Napier as their offensive coordinator, Kevin Steele as their defensive coordinator. 5 draft picks that cycle. Only one in the first 3 rounds, which was CJ Spiller. All right. 2010, quarterback Kyle Parker, Napier and Steele are still their coordinators. 6-7 was the record, and 6 NFL draft picks, pretty good. They had 3 in the first 3 rounds: Jarvis Jenkins, Daquan Bowers, and Marcus Gilchrist. All right, the first time they actually took a leap and started being a more competitive team, sort of in a national sense, is 2011. So that was when they made a change at coordinator. And by the way, so Billy Napier and Kevin Steele, both essentially failed as coordinators at Clemson, but both have regenerated into fantastic offensive and defensive minds in other places. Steele at Auburn, Napier at Louisiana, and then at Arizona State before that. But I think for one, like this is the first thing that Clemson did in a really impressive way is like making a change at coordinator, understanding he needed to. Napier wasn't ready at the time, so give Dabo Swinney a lot of credit for going out and making a really good hire in Chad Morris. But I don't even think Chad Morris is where they made their first step. They made their first step with Taj Boyd at quarterback in that 2011 season. So they go 10-4 that year. You got Taj Boyd as your quarterback, Chad Morris as your offensive coordinator, and Kevin Steele. 4 NFL draft picks that year. On 3 of them go in the first 3 rounds. All right, so 2012, you build on Taj Boyd. All right, you Boyd's your quarterback again. You make a change then at coordinator as well. You change from Kevin Steele to Brent Venables, another step up at the time, step up to an 11-2 year. All right, 2013, 4 draft picks that year, 1 in the first 3 rounds. 2013, they go to 11-2, still Taj Boyd at quarterback. All right, and you still have Morris and Venables as your coordinators. 5 NFL draft picks, but now your first quarterback, which is Taj Boyd, who goes in the 6th round. All right, 2014, 10-3, back to take a step back again with Cole Stout as your quarterback. And
Dabo didn't play Watson very much.
Dabo didn't play Watson. So then obviously we know what happens in 2015. You go 14-1, and then you tear up again. Why? Because Deshaun Watson is your quarterback. So you got Deshaun Watson there. You got 9 picks that year in the NFL draft. 4 of them were first 3-round guys: Shaq Lawson, Kevin Dodd, Mackenzie Alexander, TJ Green. All right, 2016. Again, 14-1 again. You still have Deshaun Watson as your quarterback. You got Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott as your offensive coordinators the last 2 years. And then Deshaun Watson gets picked in the first round. 2017, step back, 12-2. Kelly Bryant's your quarterback. 2018, big step forward again, 15-0. Trevor Lawrence is your quarterback. 2019, 14-1. Trevor Lawrence is your quarterback. That's a long maybe that's rambling, but I think it's really interesting to lay it all out in the sense that, look, the way Clemson has done this is recruiting, but there's a lot of teams that have or did recruit in a comparable way to Clemson. What they did is they brought in they landed good coordinators. Like Dabo Swinney made smart hires at important times in the coordinator positions. And secondly, look at their quarterbacks. It was a tear up at Taj Boyd. It was a tear up at Deshaun Watson, and arguably it's a tear up at Trevor Lawrence. And when you have those kind of quarterbacks, that's how you elevate a good roster to great. Like, yeah, I mean, you're going to have a bunch of guys drafted. And I think this is also interesting too. When you look at the distribution of who is drafted, and again, I typically value the first 3 rounds because those are the guys that are no-brainers, that are like the guys changing games. And when when you talk about first 3-round picks in that 10-year stretch, 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 5 wide receivers or tight ends, 1 offensive lineman, 10 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 7 DBs. So you want like a recipe? It's defensive line, it's defensive back, it's quarterback. That's the Clemson recipe, at least. Defensive line, defensive back, quarterback, coordinators. Like, that's the 4-pronged plan that has allowed Clemson to be so successful. And so when you think about it in those terms, to me at least, I think about a lot of teams that are probably capable of recruiting at that level, but are you finding the quarterbacks? Are you settling at quarterback? Are you misevaluating at quarterback? Because if you get one, then it gives you a chance to get another, and you can't miss on that second try. And you can't, everyone could get one. Everyone could get a Taj Boyd, but then can you go and find the Deshaun Watson next? Can you go recruit the Deshaun Watson next? Can you go recruit the Trevor Lawrence next? Can you go recruit the DJ Uiagalelei next? Like, it's remarkable what they've done. It's not meant to diminish what they've done, but I think it's very clear what the recipe has been.
I completely agree with everything you said. I do think there's some important kind of nuances we should point out here. Right? Are a lot of teams capable of recruiting at Clemson's level? From a pure talent perspective, yes, there's no doubt. are they capable of maintaining the same culture that Clemson does while recruiting at that level? I would argue, I think far fewer are capable of doing that. A, because we look around and we don't see very many programs that have culture like that. But we know Clemson very carefully curates who it takes. There's a lot of guys they won't take. There's some guys recently who we've celebrated that have gone to other programs in the SEC who Clemson told no. We don't think you're a good kid. No, you hit a girl. You're at a different school now, right? Like we're not going to take a commitment from you. They will take a couple characteristics every year, and from what I understand from talking to guys on that staff, like they're really in on character and culture, and like they have to make sure. Okay, we might have 7, 8 knuckleheads on this roster. We're going to have 79 non-knuckleheads, right? And a lot of kids who are just genuinely good people who do the right thing. And if you're going to be one of those knuckleheads, you better be a really, really good player. Otherwise, we're not going to tolerate it. Their culture they create for the level at which they recruit is really kind of unparalleled. And their extremely low attrition rate. I mean, Barton, they carry like a Northwestern, Stanford level rate of attrition, which we just don't see with programs that sign that many 4- and 5-star kids. So, like, it seems like their hit rate on the guys they do sign, I'd put Clemson's hit rate up there against anybody in the country who recruits at like a top 25 level on a year in, year out basis. And a lot of that is their picky selection process. I think they could be 3 or 4 spots higher in recruiting rankings on an annual basis if they just went out and did, I just give me talent. But that's just not what they do. The other thing I think they did a really good job of is they had some extremely embarrassing losses in the early part of the decade, right? I mean, West Virginia had the whole like honk if you scored 70 on Clemson thing, right? And that led to Kevin Steele, who was a pretty good coordinator for them for a while until that kind of last year with the breakdown stuff, like him being gone. And then in 2012, their number 2 team or number 3 team in the country, Florida State, goes in there and beats them in Clemson by like 4 or 5 touchdowns. And it kind of felt like, remember the whole Georgia blackout thing against Alabama? Was that 08, I think it was, when Bama comes over there and just wipes them? And it's like, damn, Georgia's been building to this. It's supposed to be Georgia's year. It's supposed to be Clemson's year. Then Bama comes in, and they're like, no, actually, we've arrived. No, thank you. We'll go ahead and take this SEC now. It kind of felt like that with Florida State going in there and stomping them that year with Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins and all those dudes on that roster. But Dabo, to his credit, kept those kids believing. Like, that is hard to do after, like, the year before you give up 70 to West Virginia, right? Like, we had the word Clemsoning for a reason. I know Dabo hates the word, but Clemsoning was a real thing for a while, and yet they kept performing at a high level overall, and they kept believing, and they kept getting better.
I think that's a good point about the culture. Like you said, they would be higher in the recruiting rankings, not only if they took other guys that wanted to go there that are higher ranked, but if they just had more room in their class for the scholarships based on the attrition that most schools typically have. So I'm just sort of, I think we've come to the conclusion that like Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, and Ohio State are the schools that are recruiting at a level that's just sort of, they have national title rosters. I'm just looking at this, and you could throw Oklahoma in their mix because they're in the playoffs regularly. They always have a good quarterback play. Like, I'm not going to include them in this discussion, but I'm just curious, spitballing here. I'm looking at the 2020 team rankings after that top 5, and I'm gonna exclude Oklahoma because, like I said, they're already basically there. But like A&M, Auburn, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, that's through the top 10. I'll go through like the 15 here, or I'll go through like 16 well, let me say this: like Oregon, Miami, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Notre Dame. Let's just say as schools that have over the last few years typically been in that kind of contending for top tier class range. Do any of those jump out as classes that if they landed a tier up quarterback, not even like a transcendent Trevor Lawrence, but just a quarterback better than what they've had that can make them a better team that they can then build on to springboard into like a Clemson type of advancements? Do any of those just like jump out to you?
This is a topic that I've been really interested on, and just like, are we seeing a new class of super team, right? And my initial answer is always yes, but I think if you argued it in the moment, in prior decades, you could have said the exact same thing, right? Like, is Nebraska and Miami a new class of super team? When they were winning 5 out of 10 titles in a decade. So you mentioned those 5, right? Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, or excuse me, Oklahoma, LSU. I think Texas absolutely could. Like they recruit at a close enough level. Florida could, Michigan could, Auburn could, Penn State could. We have a Notre Dame question, so I'm going to push it off, but I think they're in the conversation, and I think that's the way they have to do it, by the way, if you're Notre Dame. USC, clearly, Texas A&M, Florida State. The 2 here I think I want to include, and then there's kind of a drop, right, for me, are Miami and Washington. Like, if you want to include some West Coast powers. The next one's obviously, like, I think if you're going to put Washington here, you have to put Oregon in there. And then do you put Tennessee in there based on what they're doing right now? Like, they haven't been able to sustain this at all. And, like, if they don't have a good year on the field, there's a pretty good chance their class somewhat falls apart. But I think you put them in. And then after that, man, there is a huge drop-off. Like, after those teams I just listed, and the drop-off is like Stanford, South Carolina, Maryland, Nebraska, UCLA, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Kentucky, North Carolina, Ole Miss, Virginia Tech, Arizona State, Pitt, TCU. Like, to me, that's where the huge drop-off is. Everybody else that we listed kind of gets athletes, and if you get a super QB, I could see him making a run, not a Bama 5-year type run.
So, and to narrow down the exercise even more, I guess I think of it as like who has the Clemson recipe, in that all they're missing is that quarterback, and they have maybe a really strong foundation in terms of their, like, my worry with Texas is, like, there's been, like, I don't have confidence in the rest of their program yet. I don't have confidence in the stability in the coaching staff, the coordinators. Like, they still have a lot to prove there.
Okay. So I was answering it more from the perspective of
right.
Like,
and
can they get the talent and then level up just with the quarterback?
Right. I'm trying to think of it more in the term. I didn't clarify that, but I'm trying to think of it more in the terms of, like, from a who can do sort of what Clemson has done. I think Penn State is definitely. I'm looking at Auburn, and I'm wondering about Auburn because I just wonder how much I ding Auburn for being turned off by Chad Moore or Gus Malzahn's offense. But yes, like, they have the coordinator, they have a head coach, and hey, maybe they're about to have the former Clemson OC and Chad Morris. Like, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, maybe Auburn is the one. I think Auburn makes sense. I think
Penn State, like you said, yeah.
Penn State definitely makes sense. We'll talk Notre Dame; they make sense, but we'll dig in more on them in a question later. I think Florida makes some sense in the sense of what could Dan Mullen do with the quarterback, because then it's about, we've already seen what Dan Mullen could do with Dak Prescott. So what happens when Dan Mullen gets that kind of a talent at Florida? Maybe he has him with Kyle Trask. We'll see. But, what's the follow-up act at Florida with that? I think Tennessee is a fair one to sort of put in the mix there, as far as, like, they could get their Taj Boyd. Like, they need their Taj Boyd. They don't need their Deshaun Watson. Like, they could just start taking the steps towards the Clemson track if they just get their Taj Boyd. That's the first step. Maybe that's Harrison Bailey. We'll see. And then, I think Michigan is, like, they haven't had a Taj Boyd in a while either, really. I mean, give them a 6-round quarterback and let's see what Michigan can do. That would be fair. I mean, but point being, like, it's an interesting exercise to think about. Like, when you think about Clemson as more of a product of, there's a lot that's gone into it, but a product of quarterbacking and a product of Dabo Swinney's leadership and making good hires, it frames it as a little bit more of an attainable route. As hard as that is, you're still a couple hires and a couple a couple players away from sort of accelerating in a really dramatic way.
There's no doubt. All right, so let's go ahead and go to SC 247-855. He writes, on your position use series, Wisconsin and Michigan rated in the top 4 for edge players. Iowa has also had success recruiting lower rated players at offensive line and tight end. Last year, the On the Move, last year on the Move the Sticks podcast, Tony Romo's high school basketball coach came on and mentioned that the Northern kids are often not as heralded, but can sometimes be more athletic / have a wider base of skills because it's too cold to play football 365 days a year. So many of them play basketball, wrestle, or other sports. Matt Rule and others have emphasized how much they prefer two-sport athletes. You guys also mentioned two-sport athletes or multi-position high school players. Do you think there's something to this idea in outperforming expectations for the position use stuff and records in general? Or do you think ratings are now better able to capture athleticism / diverse bases of skills, he writes?
I mean, we are trying to capture athleticism and diverse skills like never before. And so I think we're more equipped for it. I don't know that others in the industry harp on it quite as much as we do. I mean, this is like my thing. This question is sort of my, I don't know, my pet project. I even people on message boards even like kind of bust my chops on it and act like it's more important for a guy to play basketball than play football to me. And while that's obviously an exaggeration, it is important to me because we are dealing with the odds, like the odds and playing the numbers and the odds that a player who is in Southern California who plays 7-on-7 year round and only plays one side of the ball on his high school team with a bunch of other, FBS prospects is going to be a better long-term player than the kid in Wisconsin that plays quarterback for his high school team, plays 4 sports, and doesn't play 7-on-7 year round. If that kid in Wisconsin is a good athlete, then give me him. But the problem is they're harder to find because they're not as readily apparent in terms of like their football skill set. So yeah, I believe in that in a big way. And like one interesting example, I think back to like Trey Waynes, who came out of Michigan State as a first round pick at cornerback. And you look back at his high school profile and he ran a 10.7 500-meter dash in Wisconsin high school in track. And granted, he ran some indoor track too, but like if he's running a 10.75 in the 100 meters in Wisconsin, what is that kid running in Florida if he's running year round? And so I think it helps. I do think it helps sort of find those guys. And I do think in terms of like the idea, like multi-sport players are huge in 2 respects. Like one is they are cultivating skills that you're not cultivating in terms of like focusing and specializing in football. But maybe more importantly from our end, if you're a great athlete and an elite athlete that has a future in the NFL and a future dominating other good athletes, you're probably good at more things than one. You're probably really good in everything you do. Like that's what I want. If I'm building a team, if I'm a director of player personnel, I want my team. When we go out and we play wiffle ball as a team bonding activity in the summer, I want dudes that are jacking it like over the wiffle ball fence or whatever, like over the parking lot or whatever we're doing, because they're just good at stuff. Like if I got a bunch of guys that all they can do is backpedal and do ladder drills, then I don't think I've got a well-rounded group of athletes. I want guys, you throw the basketball out there and they can all get after it on the basketball court. They all dunk. I want guys that when you're playing wiffle ball, they can blast shots to left field. I want guys when you're playing croquet, like they are good at it. Like players that are good at everything they do, to me, are what you want to build a team around. And obviously there's exceptions, but I believe strongly, and I think that's why Iowa has a lot of success. Wisconsin has a lot of success. I think that was fascinating when I dug into edge guys, finding out that like of Wisconsin's edge guys, 4 of them was from Wisconsin and unheralded. And it's like, they got athletes up there too. You got to put them in the right place. The thing is, there's not the depth of them. There's only, there's hundreds of, thousands of kids in South Florida. There's, 50 in Wisconsin that are actually like up to the task. So I think it's finding the right ones. But yeah, I'm a big believer. Like whatever, you're always gonna get me on a soapbox if you talk multiple sports.
I mean, look, it's not to the point where Barton comes in our Wednesday recruiting calls. He's like, guys, you got to see this dude crack the whip on the Iditarod. Okay, now I mean, he's never actually held a football, but I think if you look at the motion, the athletic angle, and the off balance whipping, it really like we're not there. But like, man, I think it is important. It matters. And like a large portion of our recruiting calls after we go through like what we're doing now, we're having guys from different regions watch people because we're not going to camps. We have a little more free time. So we're really digging in on the film, but we also dig into the athletic testing numbers and including your track times. Right. And we'll say, okay, like that's a pretty good track time. What did he run that on? Like is that a wind dated thing? Like how much did he beat the rest of his field by? Right. Like you may have a time for Minnesota that's maybe not that great, but if he beat everybody else by 2 or 3 tenths, it's like, oh, okay, like that's worth taking note of, right? This guy is kind of a different level athlete compared to the people he normally plays. I think that could translate. So, a good question at SC, and that was just on a tee, man. That was perfect.
Yeah, you're gonna get me off track if you start talking about non-specialization and multi-sport backgrounds.
All right,
Let's see. Yeah, what we
are
got?
you logged back in now?
Yeah. We got the Notre Dame question here.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, Nick Baker.
All right, Nick Baker, where you at, buddy? Now I've lost already. You go. Here we go. My question about Notre Dame before the bowl game versus Iowa State. Brian Kelly talked about leveling up on recruiting and getting to a top 5 class. I think coronavirus has played a part in losing some recruits, Deion Colsey and maybe Will Shipley. Do you think Notre Dame can get to a consistent top 5 class in today's landscape? Or are we going to be in really good but not good enough purgatory for the rest of the BK era?
Well, you put good cop, bad cop on this, or how are we going to do it? So
I've thought a lot about this, but go ahead. You can take the first stab at this.
All right. Consistent top 5, like the qualifier on this, man, is my hang up, because I think Notre Dame can land top 5 classes on occasion. I don't know if they can do it consistently. We just got done talking about, can Clemson level up in recruiting if they wanted to? Yes, they could. They absolutely could take some more talented, like physically talented guys who are more character risks. Notre Dame, if it so chooses, could take more guys academically who might not succeed there for all 4 years. They could take some guys character-wise who they currently don't. They could perhaps adopt some recruiting practices that maybe some other schools adopt in terms of benefits and whatnot that I think maybe they don't engage in to the same extent that those schools do. But I'm going to say consistent top 5 class, no, I don't. I think there's too many teams that have too much access to talent in their own backyard and have no character or academic restrictions that allow them to select from a wider pool. But I do think Notre Dame could level up in recruiting.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame – I don't think Notre Dame – like this is my opinion on Notre Dame recruiting has been curated over time here to where I feel like I finally got a clear vision of what I want to articulate with Notre Dame. Yes, they should try to recruit at a higher level. But I don't think Notre Dame has to recruit top 5 recruiting classes. I think if you're Georgia, if you're LSU, if you're Alabama, if you're Ohio State, though that's a little bit different, and if you're a lot of these sort of Texases of the world, I think you should be. If you're not recruiting the top 5, I think you're not doing it well enough. Clemson, though, we just talked about it. Clemson has not recruited consistently in the top 5 for a number of reasons. Now, the thing about Clemson, though, is they can win on just about anybody. They're a threat to win on just about anybody. I don't think Notre Dame is at a point right now in their recruiting where other programs are scared when Notre Dame jumps in the mix. That's what Notre Dame has to get to. They have to get to a point where when they want a guy and they jump in the mix, other teams are scared that Notre Dame is now in the chat room. And so but here's the thing though, that to me is very different than just quote recruiting at a top 5 level. Because I think that Notre Dame, because of who Notre Dame is, because of Notre Dame's culture, the type of person that Notre Dame needs to recruit, I think that they really are largely can recruit and should recruit in the same manner that Clemson does. And so here's the thing with Notre Dame. Like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 6 priorities for recruiting are get your quarterback. Maybe Ian Book is their Taj Boyd, like we talked about earlier. And maybe Tyler Buckner, who is their 2021 commit, is their Deshaun Watson. I think that there is a chance of that. I think Tyler Buckner is really probably pretty good. I think there's a chance that he is their Deshaun Watson, but they really haven't had their guy prior to this. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser got drafted high, but I don't think anyone like necessarily thinks that was the window that Notre Dame had for making a run. They need to get their quarterback, and then they need to be good, because I think the talent on the roster in place is good enough with a quarterback to go and win some of those games against those type of teams that they need to beat. But here's the other thing on the recruiting thing with Notre Dame, because I think this is an important clarification to make. The best players on Notre Dame's team this year might very well be Kyle Hamilton and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And those guys, when you think about their recruitment, yes, Notre Dame beat Georgia on Kyle Hamilton. But when Notre Dame prioritized him, he was a 3-star kid. Notre Dame made him a priority. They out-evaluated, they out-recruited, and they won him, and he happens to be a perfect fit for Notre Dame. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was someone that was committed to Virginia that Wake Forest was recruiting, and they sort of pulled him over when Clark Lee and Mike Elko came over, and they pulled him from like a Wake Forest level recruitment. And now he's going to be maybe a first-round pick. And so when we're ranking guys, we have the entire process to correct our mistakes and to get it right. Colleges don't have that luxury, right? They gotta. So what Notre Dame, I do not think that they should do is chase stars. Like, that's a huge, especially at Notre Dame, like if you're chasing stars, that's a mistake. But I think you have to be able to identify who you really want, and you have to be able to win some of those battles. Like that's not something that Notre Dame consistently does enough of, but the stars next to their name really doesn't matter. It's more about when they prioritize a guy, who's going to win between Notre Dame and Ohio State. Right now, Ohio State's going to win 9 of those 10. It's got to be a flip of a coin.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And yeah, they've got to find some edges in scouting. Like, we just got done talking in the prior question about all these kids from the Midwest, right? Like, Notre Dame's got to find those dudes. It doesn't have to be finding Kyle Hamilton out of Georgia. I mean, that's great they did. But, like, if we allegedly have all these kids in Notre Dame's backyard in some of these colder Midwestern states who have all this unlocked potential, like, go find them, Irish. Like, that could be the way that's potentially your market inefficiency. Iowa and Wisconsin don't have to have the stranglehold in that market.
Plus, and the reason why I think it's so important to get your quarterback is I do think their roster is close enough now. It's sort of a top 10, top 15 roster. And if you get your quarterback, then I think that could be enough to where you can win with him. Brian Kelly's a good enough coach. They've got good enough development. They're a good enough team to where they can compete in a meaningful way for a national championship. And then if you get that year where you are legitimately on the doorstep of a national championship, I'm not talking about making the playoffs and getting blown out. I'm talking about, like, you were a team that everyone was like, man, Notre Dame was different. That squad could roll. Then all of a sudden the recruiting starts to become easier. And I just think Notre Dame is on they're outside the club right now. Like, they can't get in the club, the cool club yet, because I think they just, they're not that from a recruiting standpoint. This staff, this team, like, there's not, like, that's not who they are from a recruiting standpoint right now. But that's who they can be, I think, if they get that win. I think the quarterback, they're close enough to where if they get the quarterback that could put them over the edge.
And, like, let's not forget the really elite kids that Notre Dame is in on for the most part. Those are the elite kids that everybody wants, because nobody's going to say, hey, Barton, I really don't want this great culture kid who also happens to run 4.4 in my program, right? So, like, the battles they're fighting for those 4 and 5 stars they do choose to recruit for the most part are really hard fought battles, man. Like, they're not, Notre Dame's not often getting this 5-star, or, well, we don't have these anymore, but like these 4-star who everybody else backed off of, and he's still, still a 4-star in the ratings, but other schools knew some stuff. Like, Notre Dame's usually the school that knows the thing, right? Like, they're not typically grabbing that low-hanging fruit, and I agree with you, they should not try to start doing that. After we go through our ad break here, we will come back and talk a couple more listener questions. All right. So we are back from our ad break and back into the listener questions. Very much appreciate you all going on Apple Podcasts, giving us that 5-star rating, 5-star review. This one comes from DGow33. Said some nice stuff about the show, and he asks, how does recruiting in the Northeast differ from, say, Texas, Florida, or California? What things should high school athletes seek out to better expose themselves if they live in non-recruiting hotbed locations?
So I guess this is a question coming from the perspective of the recruit. Is that how you're reading this?
I think so. Or either that or maybe a parent or high school coach. But yeah, for sure.
I mean, I would say I think it's important to get to college camps. It's important for coaches to see you, and so if you can do that, great. But if in lieu of that, sort of to circle back, like if you run track, like if you're a good athlete, if you're not a good athlete, I can't help you that much. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but like if you're not really, yeah, like if you're not really good, then you can't juke the system. Like you should honestly be okay going play in FCS or Division II. Like those are good too. Like that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't try to trick yourself into getting into a good school or a high level program if you're not good enough. But that aside, if you are like an elite player, the thing that I think helps players and we talk to coaches all the time, and they're like, look at this kid. This kid's a stud, and they don't send me his football film. They send me the film of him in the gym messing around and dunking. They send a film of him, power cleaning 350 pounds. I think if you have some of those traits and skills, present them, put them on Twitter, get them out there, send them to coaches so that they can then say, hey, so that way they can watch the film and they can know what they're looking at. It certainly helps me. When I have something else other than the film, the track time, I hate to sort of just go back to this multi-sport stuff, but it's just a verifier. Like if you're from an area that doesn't get foot traffic, then all you're missing is coaches to validate who you are. So give them something to validate it. Give them something. All rims are 10 feet. I don't care if you've never played basketball before in your life. If you can go tomahawk on a 10-foot goal, that's going to be something that coaches will then be able to say and be like, all right, at least I know he's not a bum. Like I know he's got some athleticism in him.
No doubt. That makes a lot of sense there. All right. So Longhorn 3210, they asked us, over the years, I've had the theory that Texas high school football players are often maxed out after high school because of the culture and terrific coaching in that state. I have mixed feelings because of draft results, but there are many examples that do support the theory. What do y'all think? I've certainly heard it. I'm sure Barton has too, that, like these Texas guys are, if not maxed out, a little bit closer to their ceiling perhaps, which I think is a little bit too much of a generalization. Although I think if you took like an average sampling of kids from Texas versus kids from Florida, I think there's probably some truth to the idea that Texas kids are a little bit close to being maxed out, simply because Texas high school programs have much nicer facilities. I mean, like you go to some of these basically wherever the opening or Under Armour camp is that year, and it's like, oh, hey, here's a $12 million indoor facility that we also have literally on our campus. And in Florida, like you don't have programs that have indoor facilities. You don't have the nutrition and the multiple strength coaches on a high school football staff. So there are reasons to believe that maybe on average, a Texas player might be a little more closer to his ceiling than a Florida player, simply because he's had more opportunities for development. Whereas, Florida, oftentimes these kids are really, really raw, and you recruit some kids from Florida and it's like, hey, if I put 50 pounds on this kid, and the coach isn't joking, they're like, hey, I mean, it'll take me 2 years, but once he gets 3 meals a day and actually lifts some weights, he's going to be a beast. But we do see that sometimes in Texas too, man. Like it's not like that never happens in Texas. I think the issue is one of frequency. How often do we see that happening in Texas? How often do we see that happening in Florida?
Do you remember? I just assume you followed this. I know you were in Florida, but I think you were pretty dialed in nationally. But I mean, when the Texas Mac Brown regime started going downhill,
oh yeah,
do you remember like the way they recruited? That basically like February would come around, they'd have 2 big junior days, and they would fill their class. Like they'd take 20 commits in February for the following February. So before anyone's played a down of football, before anyone's played a down of spring football, Texas would basically have their class filled. And it was basically because they could. They could almost just get it out of the way.
It was like making your bet on the river after the turn card.
Yeah.
I was like, what are we doing?
And they pick because they could pick. I mean, they had first pick. And so they would pick first and pick early. And you are by definition at that point taking maxed out players. Like you're taking early developers. And so that kind of doomed Mac Brown, and it proved to come back and bite him. And so I still think I mean, there's still guys that are overexposed, have been trained their whole life, 7-on-7 their whole life, all the stuff we talked about earlier. But I mean, as the commenter, who's our guy, Longhorn 3210, as he said, like there's some skepticism to the idea that they're all maxed out because, like, I just looked at this year's draft. First 5 guys from Texas taken: Okudah, CeeDee Lamb, Caleb Von Chasen, Jalen Reagor, Kenneth Murray. All those guys were no doubt guys. Chasen certainly wasn't maxed out because his first year playing football was a junior year. But all those guys had offers from everybody else. But the next 6 taken were Jordan Brooks, Jeff Gladney, Robert Hunt, Ross Blacklock, Laviska Shenault, and Antoine Winfield. Other than Blacklock, none of those guys were highly rated. So they're still good players in Texas. The point I'm getting to is that sometimes the best players in Texas aren't the earliest developers. And so I think that
did any of those guys go to A&M or Texas?
No.
Any of those 12?
It was something like the first 17 or something didn't go. Let me see. Well, I got it right here. First 11, 12, 13, 14. I think the first 14 or so guys did not go to Texas or A&M.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there's something to the idea that because high school football in Texas is so popular, like we have websites dedicated to high school football in Texas, we have magazines, like preseason magazines about Texas high school football. Do you think that like the celebrity level of these players at the high school level is so much greater than it is in other states that it might cause their hype to be like within their own state sort of out of control a little bit, and those schools focus in on those guys who are really stars at the high school level more so than perhaps projecting them as much as they should have been doing 4 or 5 years ago? Because the results would say that the teams with the top picks, Texas and A&M, in the draft have not been projecting enough, and perhaps have been relying a little bit too much on guys who were just studs in high school.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Like if you've got a guy that's, you're building your board out after their sophomore years, and he's the top of your board, and it's just going to be just like in 24/7 sports rankings, like the guys that we miss, I guarantee you that the guys that we miss on, I haven't done this study, but I guarantee you the guys we miss on are the guys that are ranked earliest. And the guys that we move up late are more rare that those guys are misses. And it's because it's a more reactive ranking. And so from the college perspective, I really think that you're going to get in trouble when you're fixated on the guy you've been watching since sophomore year instead of being willing to like identify and look, you've been recruiting and building a relationship with them, and then you want to take them. And so I think that's a really tricky thing for colleges to navigate, is making sure that you're recruiting them early enough while also leaving the opportunity for other guys to grow in your subconscious or your consciousness.
There's also incentive there, right? If you're a college, there is an incentive to move on to the next class because you're getting the jump start. And I think that there is a breaking point where it does make sense to move on to the next class, devote your scouting resources to, assuming that they're finite, devote your resources to the next class, start looking at the next class, get a jump start on that next class. I'd be interested to see if some schools can have an advantage simply by waiting back a lot and really focusing on late developers and being willing to punt maybe on some of these January, February junior days at some of these schools seem to have. I don't think anybody will do it, but if one team did it while the rest of the market focused on the next class, it might have an advantage. Just self-disclosure here from our standpoint, it makes a lot of financial sense as a business to start to look at the next class as well for us. But I think we did take a good job this year and really focus on those final ratings, perhaps more so, at least from my understanding. I haven't been here that long, than we did in prior years. Like, we really took time to look at senior years more.
Shay Dixon and I were talking, because Shay, we talked about this on the podcast, but Shay Dixon, who runs our LSU site, observed that LSU's last offer in the past, I don't know how many classes it was, 5 or something, and last take were, I want to say it's either the last take in the class and or the lowest rated player in the class, maybe both, has always been drafted. And I think that speaks to the late risers, and it almost makes you wonder if, and I talked about this with Shay, like if you're a program like LSU and you have a state like that, Louisiana, and certainly Texas, the state of Texas would fall into this category as well. Georgia probably would, and the big ones probably would. But if you just sort of carve out and say, no matter what, we are going to leave 2, maybe 3 spots available in our class, and we're going to take the best senior risers in our state and or go try to recruit those guys. And because if you're a state that dominates if you are a program that dominates your state like LSU does Louisiana in recruiting, you kind of have the ability to do that. But you also often aren't going to have room for those guys when they rise up. There was a kid in the state of Louisiana this past year that Jonathan Horton was his name, who was his first year playing football as a senior. His film is ridiculous. It's absurd. And he commits to Virginia, and LSU probably didn't really have room for him, but that's the type of kid that, you know, if LSU just sort of carves out a spot, or if Texas carves out a spot in the state of Texas, and, you know, for those senior risers, like, I bet pretty good chance a lot of those guys are going to hit. Obviously that's maybe easier to draw up in theory than it is in practice, but it's kind of an interesting, it kind of gets to, I think the point of the question originally is like the idea of, a lot of players are maxed out in a lot of states. It's just a matter of whether you're picking the right ones, because there's still a lot of guys getting developed out of the state of Texas that are really elite.
If I ran a program, I would pay a computer programmer to scrape the offer lists of basically all FBS programs daily, right? Just write some code, because we don't have like an offer feed on 24/7. So you would have to go to each team's offer list daily. It's not that hard to write that code, I don't think. And then you could actually generate an offer report, and you could filter it in different ways. And if you had some programs that you know and respected that you think, hey, they do a good job recruiting our area as well, maybe they recruit a little bit lower level prospect than we do, but occasionally like we cross paths with them, or just in their own backyard. Like they're sitting on a guy, they finally offer him. I think that would be well worth the money to write that script and just get that daily scrape and get that report. I know there's some services out there that sell something like that, but it's not really a scrape. It's more like they rip it off Twitter, and I don't know how well you can filter and sort it. Yeah,
it'd be nice to be able to do it almost, take these strategic looks at it. Like, you know what, I want to find out every time SMU offers a kid in the state of Texas, or I want to find out every time Billy Napier's staff offers a wide receiver, or I want to find out every time, whatever, like Louisiana Tech offers a Northern Louisiana kid. I don't know. Like, I think that there's a lot of, you're right. I mean, if you could tailor that to sort of more specific criteria other than just like, I want to see this school's offer list every day, that could be really valuable information. Because not all offers are created equal, and not all, I don't trust every offer that I don't want to name a specific school, but there's offers that mean more by position or by region, depending on whose school you're talking about, than others.
And some kids lie. I mean, literally in our Slack, we have guys who point out like, hey, this staff just told me this kid who put this offer on Twitter, it's not real. He just made it up to get attention. Like, if you were using something that's a little more curated as opposed to just what the kids put on Twitter, I think it'd be a better product. I might hit up Tech about that. That'd be kind of cool. Like the daily offer report, we could focus on some prospects who are blowing up with offers. That'd be neat.
I tell you, college coaches would be all over it because, like you said, I mean that some degree of that already goes on. What we're talking about, and that's when I talk to coaches, one of the more valuable, just sort of data points and out there that they monitor is just making sure they are aware of everybody that they want to be aware of.
Absolutely. Well, we are minute 5 into this thing. I think we'll probably call it a day for this week. Really appreciate you all listening to the Barton and Bud Show on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network. Guys, make sure you check out the College Ball Daily as well and the new 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. Really good stuff going on there. Check out Josh Pate on the on Late Kick and Steve Wiltfong on the Whip Around. And make sure you give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. We are available, Apple Podcasts, obviously, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. So hit us up there and really appreciate you all listening to the show.